The 10 worst aspects of existential crisis. Hi, my name is Britt Hartley. I'm an atheist spiritual director here at No Nonsense Spirituality, and I do a lot of tools for nihilism and the void without requiring belief. So, in no particular order, except for I think number one. Number one is the loneliness. The biggest difference I think in my nihilism is I think there's a difference between seeing a comet coming and hitting the earth and being the only one to see it, and seeing the comet coming and having a bonfire with friends and talking about it and sharing some food while you watch your impending doom. From the point of view of experience, those are really two different experiences. So one of the problems with existential anxiety is that when you are around people, you're still alone because you see a comet that they don't, and it's maddening. It's like being on the Truman Show. So we have a study from 2018 showing that there is something called existential loneliness, and their research, which was published in Personality and Individual Differences journal, found that existential loneliness arises from this deep disconnection from the world itself rather than just a lack of social interaction. So I had friends and family when I went through my worst nihilism phase, but not a single one could help. Not a single one understood. I was alone, even though I was socially very well connected. Because if people subconsciously have all these walls protecting them from meaninglessness or the things that you're thinking about, then they can't go with you. And even worse, if you are experiencing existential depression, you may not even want them to understand you because you see them and you see that they are happier than you with their little bullshit story, even if it's not true. And so if you're alone, you're alone and then no one understands you. And then part of you doesn't even want to be fully understood because you don't want to bring someone you love to where you are because you're suffering. And so to me, I think that that is the absolute worst part of existential depression, is just how lonely you are in it, even when you are around other people. So what's to be done for that? There's two things that come to mind. One is taking risks. So many people are actually willing to take off their masks, but are waiting for someone to do it. So why not you? I found people when I started to take big social risks. Most people probably found me very strange, and I am. But I did find, by taking those risks, I did find a few people that I could be my whole nihilistic self with. And that is just the best fucking feeling in the world. There was a 2017 that studied this in the Journal of Humanistic Psychology, where they found that individuals who had undergone some kind of major existential transformation, like a deep encounter with nihilism, really struggled with interpersonal relationships afterward because of the trauma of it. And so many reported feeling a lack of emotional resonance with others because no one understood what it was like to be them. And so they just kind of cut themselves off from humanity. But the study also found that with existential therapy, you can recover from the trauma of it, and eventually people did find communities of like-minded individuals and were actually able to rebuild meaningful social connections without pretending to be someone else. And the second thing is just acceptance that if you are a truth seeker who is willing to pay the cost for harsh truths, not everyone has that core value set. Or if you got to existential depression because you are sensitive to suffering, or however you got there are benefits to your personality type and your core values, and there's also a cost for everyone. Leaning into the benefits of my neurotic personality type means that I get to do this job helping people in nihilism, which most people can't do. But that also means that there's sometimes time to pay a cost. So the cost of my personality type is at dinner parties with boring conversation and people peacocking each other with how much money they make actually makes me want to blow my brains out. But everybody pays a cost for the shadow of their personality type. So it helps me that I can contextualize it so that I'm leaning into the pros of my core values and personality type. And then also when I'm paying the cost, I can just be like, oh, this is one of those cost times. And then it just helps me not be so up and down. I can have some emotional resiliency with that. Number two on my list is therapists not being able to help. Now, I am not saying don't go to therapy. I've been to therapy. It was great for a lot of things, especially like your run-of-the-mill anxiety and depression, seeing how I was raised and how it shaped me, like IFS. Ex-Mormon therapists who helped me like catch old thought structures that still came from religion, even though I wasn't a believer anymore. It's great. But to this day, I have never found a therapist who could help me with deep philosophical existential crisis, because that's just not like, how is your social life? And let's work on your thoughts and getting sunshine. I'm considering that it's possible that it's immoral to live. And I need you to take these arguments seriously. But the therapist has never gone down that rabbit hole. So all they can do is like hold space for it. And I know that I'm not alone in that, partly because I see so many people who tell me that, us being able to talk about those things was more effective than therapy. But also I'm starting to get more and more clients who are therapists who work with me to be able to help them understand their own nihilistic clients more. And so I'm supplementing some of their training because they don't have the philosophical side of existential crisis. They're only dealing with symptoms. They're not dealing with the deeper philosophy. It's just not a part of their training. It's not their fault. So philosophers helped me way more when I was in existential crisis. And there is a small niche field of philosophical therapists that are called, existential therapists or logotherapists. Even Jungian analysts can do some of this, philosophical counselors, but that is a very small field. There's like 100 people, I swear. That's not true, but it's a very small field. There was a 2012 meta-analysis in the Clinical Psychology Review that showed that CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, was ineffective for existential crisis because it only dealt with the symptoms of distress and not the deep philosophical concerns. There was another more recent study done in 2021 in Frontiers in Psychology that found that individuals facing deep meaning crisis felt unheard in therapy. They felt like their therapist didn't even understand what they were talking about or what they were dealing with. So people would tell me go to therapy, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to therapy, but one, it's not working, and two, I think I'm giving my therapist an existential crisis because I'm pulling them down into the void with me, and they've never thought about this either. And so it just wasn't a tool that worked for me, and everyone was telling me like this is the tool, and then it just kind of felt like I was broken. Like, I guess therapy is not working for me because I'm insane or something, when really we actually have data that shows that the tools that we're getting in therapy is better for when you're dealing with symptoms, but not if you're dealing with deep philosophical questions about whether or not it's worth it to be alive. It just doesn't have the tools for that on its own. Number 3 is feeling like a hypocrite. And I'll be honest, I'm trying to be more open and honest on this channel. It's hard. I'm new here on YouTube. I'm still trying to figure out what I want to do with this. But if I'm being honest with you, person on the other side of this screen, this is one that still plagues me from time to time. This is like when Rust Cole in True Detective talks about this when he says, I tell myself that I'm here to bear witness, but the real answer is that it's obviously my programming and I lack the constitution for suicide. There's a certain amount of paradox that comes from trying to be big enough to hold opposing ideas. So on the one hand, you're trying to be life affirming. You don't want people to commit suicide. In all of my work, I'm life affirming. But then also on the other side, you're also wrestling with these really big questions like, is it unethical to bring life into this world to suffer? Like, once the life is here, we can deal with that and find ways to work with that. But then you have this other question of, wait, but is it unethical to bring life into this world to suffer? Maybe non-being is preferable to being under these circumstances. Or even, I've gone down some Reddit rabbit holes talking about the concept of the big red button. If you could press a big red button and destroy all human life on Earth, would it be the most moral thing to do? Because most people suffer for most of the time. And so I'll save the big red button conversations for another day. That's a big question that has a lot of different philosophical takes to it. But what this really is about is there's this certain amount of paradox at best or hypocrisy at worst when you're trying to make the best of life, but you're also deeply considering whether or not life on Earth in this form is even morally justified at all. And that can just feel icky in the sense that you're working with two kind of opposed ideas and trying to be big enough to hold both. Number 4 is apathy. I usually see apathy more when someone is coming from a system of meaning or purpose that they lost, and their brain is so shocked by this that essentially it goes numb and dissociates. Like it just completely checks out. So no motivation, nothing matters, can't get out of bed, nothing feels good anymore, totally numb. So, this kind of existential distress often leads to anhedonia, which is the biological inability to feel pleasure, which is a core symptom of both deep depression and existential crisis. So, in a 2010 study in psychiatric research, found that people with existential despair show neurological patterns similar to those with major depression. So they wouldn't have had major depression. There was no biological reason for it. But because the brain had been so shocked from losing a sense of meaning, the brain just doesn't know what to do and it shuts down. And now it's unable to feel pleasure at all. This is incredibly dangerous, incredibly dangerous. One of the most dangerous things on my list. Because if a big part of getting through nihilism is living life from the point of view of experience, and you're unable, biologically unable to experience joy or pleasure because your brain is shut down, this is where we lose people to suicide. And while I do think that there are tools to help, especially psychedelics especially with a guide who's aware of this to get that nervous system reset, I would also never blame or shame someone who I lost in this place, because you can see why people would get stuck. If the advice for, living your life in this world is something like find your bliss, but your brain has an inability to feel bliss, that's an incredibly dangerous place for a brain to be. And I know we've lost people in that place. It's very dangerous. If you're here, please reach out for help, and I'll include some resources at the end that may be helpful. Number 5 is just menial work. The last one, apathy and anhedonia, I had that, but I worked through it and I don't experience it now. This one, I still it still comes up for me. I still struggle with it from time to time. And it's just like menial, monotonous, stupid work, especially for me, like small talk and like stupid human games we play and hoops that we have to jump through. It's one of the reasons that I love coaching so much, is that I get to skip 10 years of small talk, and within 5 minutes, we're talking about your deepest, darkest thoughts and your actual honest experience about being a human. And I love that. So research has shown that chronic boredom can be a key indicator of an existential crisis. So menial work will lead to boredom because it lacks challenge and meaning and growth that people crave. There was a 2013 study published in Psychology of Aesthetics, Creativity, and the Arts that showed that people who were experiencing high levels of boredom were also engaging in existential reflection. They were questioning their life's meaning. They went hand in hand. So meaningless work and meaningless discussion leads to existential boredom. Existential boredom leads to more struggle with meaningless work and small talk, and it's this downward spiral. I had an entire mushroom trip once, where this was like 10 years ago, where I had to face my fear of existential boredom. I was in this phase of nihilism where I couldn't move forward, but I didn't know what was holding me back. So I did a trip with a guide, and I realized that if I let go of the idea that I'm a truth seeker or that there's truth out there, and I accept that maybe I'm not interacting with truth or reality at all, my subconscious reasoning that I didn't know was kind of operating in the background was that my life will become so boring that I will end my life and leave my child without a mother. And so that fear underneath the surface of my attention was holding me back. But once it had a name, existential boredom, I found that there are tools for this. And now I can honestly say that for most of the time, I don't experience this high levels of existential boredom. Boredom has a lot to do with the quality of your attention. And I've gotten better at that over the years. And I'll do a whole video on that another day. So number 6 is not knowing who you are. So our identities are often shaped by the roles we play in life. So parent, spouse, student, professional. And when we lose those roles, or those roles no longer provide meaning, then we may feel that not only are we dealing with, existential crisis and questions, but now we no longer know who we are. So Viktor Frankl, the founder of logotherapy, highlighted this idea of an existential vacuum, which is this condition where individuals experience this just profound sense of emptiness. And so Frankl's work suggests that when people lose their identity anchors, like their roles in society or their sense of purpose, their belief in a higher cause, then the existential vacuum leaves people not only questioning what they do, but who and what they are. And it's just like an added thing that you have to deal with when you are in existential crisis. So not only in nihilism do you know nothing about the universe, but now you know nothing about yourself and you're truly anchorless. And a lot of rebuilding has to do with finding your core values, dating yourself, seeing what this meat suit that you find yourself in likes to do. But depression, apathy, existential crisis is going to make that personal journey a lot harder. And you're going to need help with that. I certainly did and still do sometimes. Number 7 is just facing death. One thing we have absolutely solid research on is the idea that religious belief does provide comfort in the face of mortality and can lower death anxiety when you're sure of it. So the people who have the lowest death anxiety are people who are sure of their religion or sure of their atheism. Anywhere in between, you're going to have high death anxiety. So if you want your beliefs to be true, but you have doubts, that's where you're going to actually have the highest death anxiety. But if you're sure of your beliefs, it actually really does lower death anxiety. Our brain spends a massive amount of time compartmentalizing death. We know with terror management studies that when we remind you of death, that you will start to engage in distractions, you'll shop more, you'll start, using your thought-ending cliches like grandma's in a better place. You'll start putting more into your legacy subconsciously in order to deal with it. But with nihilism, with existential crisis, the distractions aren't working. The thought-ending cliches that, grandma's with Jesus now isn't working. The idea of legacy even doesn't work. This planet's going to blow up and no one's going to know that we were here. So with existential crisis, you lose all of the security blankets, not even just the religious ones. And now you have to go about your day fully aware that you're going to die and everyone around you is going to die. Now, for some, this is like a respite because you have assurance that this will end. But for many, it makes it so that you actually can't function in your life because humans were never meant to function with the idea that we're going to die. In fact, our earliest signs of religion are when we're smart enough to realize that we're going to die. So surprisingly, the research is finding that young adults report higher death anxiety than older adults, probably just because older adults have had more time to make peace with mortality and younger people have unresolved questions about their purpose. In a 2017 study in death studies, we found that death acceptance increases with age, especially if you've found some purpose and meaning in your life. Studies also show that women report higher levels of death anxiety than men. This could be just due to female brains being more neurotic by nature, or some researchers speculate that this could be differences in just emotional processing or just societal roles related to caregiving. Like to this day, something that like I'm okay with not being okay, but I'm not okay with it, is the idea that there's going to be some day where my child is going to want to talk to me or want to call me or need me for something and I'm not going to be there. And just as a mother, just as a caregiving role or the emotional feeling of that is just something that it just is not okay for me. And I'm okay with it not being okay, but it's fundamentally not okay. Like if I think about it a long time, like I'm going to go over here to my carpet and sob for a little bit because it's a lot. Death anxiety is something, though, that we can work with and contextualize to the point that your nervous system is really no longer bothered or triggered by it too much and you can function. And there is a lot of gifts in facing death directly because it focuses your life. And if this is where you are stuck, I've had so many clients show up with death anxiety that I do have a full course that works on this. This is one like fear of spiders that we can work with and get closer to and get to, maybe there's still an aspect of death that you're not okay with, in the sense that I wish it were different. Like I wish I would always be there for my child. I wish that was different. But you can get to a point where it's not totally making it so you can't function in the world. I'm still functioning in the world. Number 8 is privilege guilt. When we realize we don't have free will and life is more or less a complex game of luck, it can give you some privilege guilt. And this is more than just like recognizing your privilege in a room. It's the sense of not being able to do anything about the vast differences in the hands that we're dealt in life, wealth, opportunity. And now you don't get religious ideas to make that okay. You don't get the idea that the meek will inherit the earth or that the last shall be first because you don't even believe in that anymore. And so this can lead to intense privilege guilt that can actually start to just shut you down emotionally, because you're going to struggle to find meaning in a world where all the outcomes seem arbitrary, because the differences between having luck in this life and not having luck is just bigger than any of us feel like we'll be able to change. And so when people internalize the idea that their achievements, their circumstances, even their personality traits are largely random and predetermined, then you can experience also a crisis of agency or purpose or justice. I think the best display of that I've seen on film, maybe not the best, but maybe my most recent one, is in Poor Things, where Bella meets the philosopher and then is able to see the land of the poor. And then there's this key moment where Bella, after gaining some wealth, just kind of throws her money at the poor, hoping that it will solve their problems. And it shows like this critique of this privilege guilt and this naive charity, showing how those who suddenly realize inequality try to fix it in kind of simple transactional ways, but the money actually never made it to the poor and didn't do anything at all. And you just kind of have to sit with that as a reality. And that can be very, very difficult. Number 10 is analysis paralysis, the last one on my list. This one I've gotten better at, but as a parent, when I was kind of in nihilism and parenting, it was one of the hardest things for me. So when you lose your anchors, you have no up or down, no way to make sense of decisions, no direction, no sense of self. You have some anhedonia going on where you don't even remember what it's like to be you anymore. And then you have infinite options. There's just no way to make a choice in that because it's too overwhelming. We do have a lot of research from Barry Schwartz's research on choice overload, that when we have too many options like that, especially when we don't have any kind of compass, it's going to take us longer to decide. We experience more anxiety about making the wrong choice. And then also, even when we make a choice, we're less satisfied with our decision. And so it's just exhausting. And the brain will start to show signs of severe fatigue, leading to either procrastination or impulsive choices or both, because the brain is just so goddamn tired. So there's lots of things that we can do for this. We have to reconnect with you. We can accept good enough choices rather than the best choice. We can learn how to kind of fall in love with the process of engaging with life directly rather than overthinking it or thinking that there's like one best path for you. Instead, we can make it more like a learning game. Rather than overthinking it where you don't make any mistakes. Especially for post-religious people, we have to just deconstruct the need to be right or the need to do things right in general. So there are things that we can do for that as we get to know you more and find some compass items for you, things like core values, and also when we get our brain working for us rather than against us as far as ways to contextualize our thoughts. I was just going to do 10, but when I got to the end of this list, I wanted to add one. So I don't know. There's no rules, so I'm going to add one here. Last but not least is just dealing with intrusive thoughts in daily life. And I don't want to necessarily go into that in detail because I don't really want to encourage maybe your intrusive thoughts if you're someone who's watching this and stuck here. But just briefly, I'm just going to give you a glimpse into mine so that you can feel like you're not crazy. Because in my life, I am a functional person. Like, I'm not a homeless person. I have a job. I have a day job where my family runs a business. I was a history teacher. I have children. I have, like, on paper, it looks like a very functional human being, but my thoughts were insane during this time in my life. When my partner ever left with my kids, I would have intrusive thoughts about them getting into some kind of car accident so I wouldn't have to be responsible for them anymore. And it happened every time that they left their house. They were very vivid, fantasizing, very vivid, intrusive thoughts. And I was stuck in them and I couldn't get out of it. And I was feeling like I thought I was a good person, but I guess I'm not because I'm having these thoughts. And then I'm supposed to be a good mom. So I'm having intense amount of shame for these thoughts that I can't control, but also I can't tell anyone because it sounds crazy and they might lock me up and I don't want to do that. And so all of that together, so like intrusive thoughts happening, feeling like a hypocrite sometimes, apathy, not being able to make a decision, therapy is not helping you, not knowing who you are, not being able to connect with people, even if you have people in your life, that just the existential loneliness, then going to your stupid job and doing the stupid dishes, that more or less adds up to, I think, what this thing felt like for me. And I can tell you that it got better. I made this video for two reasons. I want you to know, if you're in this, that you're not the only person who feels this way, and that people have gotten help and resources and it got better, not just for them, but now for me. I can say today that I'm glad to be alive today. And I also wanted to have a video where you could send this to someone, like a loved one, if you have a loved one who's having a hard time understanding what you're going through. I think this would have helped For example, like my husband or my dad, or even my brother, if he would have opened that door for me, understand like why I was having such a hard time and why they couldn't connect with me and why I couldn't connect with them. So if you're in it, one of the best things that I did was just start reaching out for help. I would email people who I thought had answers to things. I would read things, especially kind of more dealing with the philosophical side of existential crisis. I put names to things, and once I put names to things, then I could figure out resources, and I could Google those things to figure out what to do with it. So how it feels now, if you're in this, is not the way that you're always going to feel about life. People have made it to the other side too. There was a time where I felt that complete anhedonia, where like I didn't feel good for like 2 years, and I just thought that this was reality, and I thought I just have to like grit my teeth and just hold on because you have children or you have people who love you who aren't going to understand or who are going to blame themselves if they, find you dead in your room. I was trying to find a nicer way to say that. I don't know how to say that. And there was like 2 or 3 years there where that really was my life. Like every day I woke up like that. Every day if I got on a plane, I would hope that I would have one of those experiences that we're seeing with planes. I wished for that. And I can promise you that there are resources that can help make this better. This is an experience. It's a hard thing for a brain to go through. It can be especially hard if you've recently lost your meaning and purpose or your way of life, or a person that made life manageable for you. But I can tell you, by working with so many people and reading so many stories, and now my own story that I'm sharing with you, that it can get better. So hang in there and reach out for help. That may include some resources that I offer, but there's also a lot of other resources. And just start searching and talking and Googling and emailing and trying to find some way to make sense of this so that your brain can recontextualize what happened to you so that you can start to process it and move forward. I am really, really glad that I'm still here, and the life that I'm living, even if I were to find out that an asteroid was going to hit the planet in a year, I would just keep doing the same life that I'm doing because it's the life that I chose. It's the life that I intentionally built from the ground up. And I hope that for you too. If there's any way that I can help you in that, let me know. And if I missed something, if I missed some fundamental if I missed some fundamental aspect of existential crisis that maybe I didn't experience but you're experiencing, please put it in the comments so I can learn more about this, so that I'm able to help more people. Because obviously my existential crisis is going to look different than other people's, but there's probably some overlap in our stories. So please let me know in the comments how I did, and let me know if there's any way that I can help. And then also always check out my nihilism course and my death anxiety course for some of that if you feel like you're still in it. So that's it for me, and I'll see you next time from Britt.